and asked them to join in their calls to stop the Cop City project.
We, local Atlanta clergy and religious leaders representing diverse communities, call on clergy, religious leaders, and people of faith and moral conscience across this nation and in solidarity with local Atlanta leaders to stop Cop City, stop the swap, and defend the Atlanta forests, Weelaunee People's Park. Today, we're gathered for this press conference, and we will be delivering a letter to Atlanta City Council, but we invite you to continue in this faithful work that we are doing and contribute wherever you find your space in this growing movement. We call on clergy, religious leaders who are a moral authority in our society to use your power in support of the forest protectors. We are deeply concerned for the greater Atlanta community and the implications for the future of public safety in the United States if Cop City moves forward.
At the press conference, the coalition presented a letter to the city council signed by over 200 clergy members. Reverend Leo Shea also read it aloud.
Despite a record-breaking amount of public comment opposing the facility, Atlanta City Council still passed legislation to build Cop City. We are troubled by leadership that stops acting on the will of the people and aligns itself instead with corporate money and the dominant power structure. Urged on by the message of peace and compassion in all our faiths, we deplore escalating militarization by city and state government. Most recently since the police killing of Rayshard Brooks here in 2020 by the Atlanta Police Department, and Tortuguita, January 18th of this year, by Georgia Patrol. We applaud the rising consciousness and the need to protect humans and the more than human by resisting police violence everywhere. And may I add that in the face of the violent raid that took place last night, as city residents gathered in solidarity to defend this forest, that is an example of the militarization that we are calling out. Through violence and greed, these lands have been subjected to centuries of abuse. From the forced removal of indigenous communities, to serving as a plantation for enslaved African labor, to the site of the old Atlanta prison honor farm in the 20th century that produced immense profits for the prison system. Today, the sounds of birdsong from the forest canopy live alongside the sound of gunfire and the adjacent APD firing range. We are troubled by the commodification of community land, water, and air on which all of us depend. We are profoundly troubled by the use of military tactics and escalated legal charges on members of our community, suppressing legitimate resistance while at the same time clear-cutting the forest trees despite not having the appropriate permits. The lands and the people of Atlanta have suffered violence for too long. We say no more. We declare with faith, commitment, and hope that this land will be a part of healing and repair. We Atlanta clergy, religious leaders, and all of those across the nation and world who are in agreement join our voices with calling for the following: a complete stop of the Cop City project and cancellation of the Atlanta Police Foundation's lease. Dropping all charges against forest defenders and protesters. We demand an independent investigation into the uses of domestic terrorism charges. We demand an independent investigation into the killing of Manuel Terán, Tortuguita. We speak their name, for which recently released video footage of the event suggests there was lying and deceit surrounding the incident on part of law enforcement in their initial reporting of the incident.
The Muskogee elder, Miko Shaban Colonel, spoke at the press conference and called for land back, and for the Muskogee people to return and rematriate the Weelaunee Forest in community with the black and brown residents of the area.
Our ancestors lived here for over 13,000 years. And if you're to do the math correctly, this country that we now call the United States is somewhere in the neighborhood of 240. Just over, nearly 2 years ago, I came here to the Weelaunee Forest. I came here with my own family, my own children, with some of my elders, to just share a little bit about how this territory and this land feels to us as Muskogee people. Because let it be known today, it was not our choice to leave here. We did go to war to protect these areas. We did go through much burden to protect these areas, only to be forced to leave here under military occupation, but also to be forced to leave here after treachery, after illegally lands were taken from us. This is our homeland. My ancestors, for generation upon generation, for millennia, are buried on the very ground that you walk on every day. And I think we have a say in how we should live as a society in this day and time. And so in this moment, our hope is to be able to come back, to rematriate, to take our lives back into the intimacy that we once had with everything that grows here in what you now call the state of Georgia. Because no matter who we are and where we come from, we have to have air, we have to have water, we have to have the elements of this earth to take care of us, regardless of what we think. We're dependent on this earth's mother, and she has been faithful in taking care of us. It's us that has not been faithful in respecting her. Our hope is that this earth is not destroyed before we even have a chance to come back. That lives aren't destroyed before we have a chance to come back. So today, in whatever way I come here to join the choruses of voices that you hear all around you saying what is going on now is a violence against all of creation. What is going on now, bringing death and harm and hurt, is a violence against all of creation. And we stand in solidarity as Muskogee people. I stand in solidarity with the voices that we hear of those tenants, those persons who live in the land now. But my hope is now at this moment in time that somehow we can change the trajectory of our species and go into a direction where we can value each other and we can stop the criminalizing of dissent. We should be able to say no. The increasing of the militarized forces out there does not ever create peace. It only creates harm. And it only harms those that are most vulnerable. That's the prayer that I carry today.
Reverend Darcy Jarrett joined in the call for stewardship of the Weelaunee Forest to be returned to the Muskogee people.
City Schools of Decatur has a statement of solidarity and acknowledgement of harms. DeKalb County and the City of Atlanta, we call on you to make good on these words, to give the land back to our indigenous siblings so that they, as they have stated and will do and always have done, work in collaboration with the black and brown community right there near where the site is, outside of the Weelaunee Forest. The City of Atlanta is ready to lease this land at just $10 an acre. Instead, give this land to the native inhabitants. Repatriate this land to the people to whom is their sacred call to defend and work in community with the black and brown communities that are there. We call on you, Atlanta City Council, to be the moral compass and to not just halt the building of this structure, but to repatriate the land to the sovereign Muskogee Nation, the sacred keepers of this land. May it be so. Amen.
Finally, Matthew Johnson spoke about the worrying amount of police repression and violence the movement has already seen.
We're projecting by the end of the day, there will be 40 people that have domestic terrorism charges, many of which just for being in a parking lot. I don't know how anybody can accept this when you have a projected 40 people that are committed domestic terrorism, not one dead body. Meanwhile, we can't even show the bruise on the police officer that was allegedly shot at with our friend's ashes. We have the ashes of a friend that we will spread. We can no longer accept this as a people, as Atlantans. If we can't figure out a way to fix public safety without locking tons of black kids up in the blackest city in America, every person in that building needs to step down. If we can't do it here, we can't do it anywhere.
Both myself and Matt from the Atlanta Community Press Collective were at the press conference, and we met up after to discuss the events of the day. During the press conference, some of the media's line of questioning was very much aligned with the types of narratives being put out by police in relation to the events that previous night, the Sunday Direct Action and Music Festival. I think it's also worth noting that the people at the clergy event did not openly demonize the actions that people chose to take on Sunday, and it was very much the media definitely gives them opportunities to try to throw people under the bus, and that did not happen.
Yeah, and we've seen that all throughout the week. Every chance that the media is trying to throw somebody to cause dissension or a divide amongst the movement has been really handily deflected by anyone who's come across it. And the clergy did not just a good job of not falling into that trap, but of actually pointing out how that line of thinking was missing the point and where the true violence was coming from.
This is happening in Atlanta. And so why are the majority of people engaging in violence coming from other states?
The reality of it is that the ones who are engaging in violence are the police, and they're from right here in Atlanta, Georgia. You got APD, you got Georgia State Police, you got GBI, you got Georgia State Troopers, you got everybody except the MARTA police who are engaging in violence and terrorism against the people who are standing against this illegal land swap. So I would suggest that the next time you decide that you are going to bring up your police rhetoric that you get from whichever police source, you go ahead and discuss that with them, because we don't know what they're doing, but what we do know is what we're doing, and what we see from them that we know. I know when I get hit by an officer. I know when I see a mother with a child begging to be let up off the ground because her children are with her. I know when I see officers pointing a rifle inside a bouncy house.
If I could just say, I'd like to just bring up a story. Initially, the colonizers that came onto this land attempted to use the indigenous folks as their slaves. However, the indigenous folks knew the land so they could get away. Now, when you ask me about why is it that you keep catching people that aren't from here, that might not reflect the people that are actually involved in the resistance. God bless you.
Thank you.
After the press conference, people from the Clergy Coalition marched to the front door and entered City Hall before making it upstairs to sign up for public comment during the City Council meeting.
Fighting for our freedom, we shall not be moved. Fighting for our freedom, we shall not be moved. Just like a tree planted by the water, we shall not be moved.
The large group of the clergy and people gathered for the Interfaith Coalition are now moving through City Hall. There's a whole bunch of cops here that look relatively nervous about the easily sized group of people. The scary Christians are now invading City Hall. Look out.
So usually in City Hall, there are several APD officers who just kind of hang out. But while the clergy are walking up to City Hall, you can look out and there is APD on every corner. And then you enter into City Hall, and there are clusters of APD. There are, I think, 4 floors to City Hall. There are clusters of APD on 3 sides of every floor of City Hall.
After an unexpectedly long awards and proclamations ceremony, the public comment section of the City Council meeting finally began.
I'm standing here today with the Faith Coalition. We are clergy and faith leaders. We are citizens, and we are protectors of the land that doesn't belong to us, but belongs to God. We are deeply concerned for our community members, for ourselves, and the implications for the future of public safety in the United States if this Cop City development goes forward. We are asking for all people of faith, those of you who sit on council regardless of your tradition or background, and those who stand with moral conscience, to stop the Cop City project. My faith convicts me and tells all of us that there is a better way. We have a prophetic moral imagination and opportunity here to do something different in Atlanta, to do something different for the South. Finally, we're asking for a community process, Let us come together with moral imagination to envision how the Wilani River Forest can be the heart and lungs of community wellness and healing, not more militarization of police. We want a process that centers the voice and needs of Muskogee leaders and community members, our indigenous siblings, incarcerated folks in surrounding prisons, families and neighbors who live in close proximity to the firing range and under police surveillance. We want holistic community safety, clean water, tree canopies, a future for every single one of our children. May it be so.
Someone from the Muskogee Creek Reservation in Oklahoma spoke about the desire to return to their homeland.
The Miko of our Halebi ceremonial grounds back home in Oklahoma has come here, where our original fire was started, and then it was taken all the way to Oklahoma. And now we want to bring it back to our land, and we want to start those fires again. Well, when we come back, we need a land to come back to. This is my first time coming back to visit my homelands. I wanted to visit here where my ancestors are as a spiritual and personal journey. I didn't want to come here to try to fight the violence that I'm hearing. What I'm hearing is from the residents is they need investment in housing and public spaces and not investment in further militarized policing. They want investment in the well-being of incarcerated and not further violent incarceration, but the well-being of the community members. Thank you, Mado. Chicharis.
I turned 70 last week, and I've lived in Atlanta my whole life. I'm not an outsider, and I am here to say to you that I find Cop City to be an abomination. My husband is a pastor of a church a couple of miles from here, and he could not be here today. He's out of town, but he stands with me with these comments. The people who have spoken before me have said the things I would say, but I would like to say that I pretty much agree with every single thing they have said about this insanity that you all are calling a police safety training facility. So I think you need to just cancel it, start having some real conversations with the people of the city to solve the real problems in a way that will actually be effective, and this facility is not going to be it. And the mayor's proposed task force is just one more way to try to propagandize us to believe that this is good for us when we're not stupid and we know it's just lipstick on a pig.
And if you harden your heart, be reminded of the story of another Pharaoh who had a very hard heart, who would not free the people of God, who would not lead them to their land. You know what happened in that story. Don't think that you will not suffer the same fate. Don't think that the infrastructure of this so-called Black Mecca will not come toppling over, because it will.
There are a couple things to note about how City Council public comment works. City Council doesn't tend to pay attention to them. Ostensibly, the only one who pays attention is City Council President Doug Shipman, because it is his job to call time and to call up the next person. But City Councilors will step in and out of the room, get something to eat. During the 17 hours of public comment for Cop City, one of them held a press conference.
There are 2 council members notoriously bad at paying attention to public comment. Dustin Hillis, who is the committee chair for the Public Safety Legal Administration Committee, basically he's in charge of police, and the other is Mary Norwood, who represents Buckhead, and has what I would describe as ontologically evil vibes. Buckhead is the northern, primarily white neighborhood in Atlanta that is wanted to secede from the city, which in Atlanta has very uncomfortable segregation and redlining parallels. But despite not paying attention during public comment, these 2 in particular both paid extra attention after public comment when Police Chief Darren Shearbaum gave testimony on what happened the night previous.
Were there any firefighter or police city employee injuries at yesterday's event?
Councilmember Hillis, there was not. We're very fortunate that was the outcome. We're fortunate there was no injuries.
If this continues, do we have the ability to deploy even greater force to quell this, the millions of dollars of damage to public and private properties?
We will make adjustments as those that use various tactics. Yesterday was an escalation. We had not seen this large number of individuals engaged in this activity. And the aggressive manner in which the officers were attacked was a significant change from what we'd seen before. When it generally had been setting property on fire, we'd seen police cars set on fire, windows busted. But this was started as an attack against individuals, men and women who are employees of the city. So that was an escalation, Councilmember Hillis, that we have already made adjustments for, both within our capability as well as with our partners.
Throughout Schierbaum's testimony, it was interesting the degree to which the chief framed Sunday's direct action as primarily being targeted against officers, and not the destruction of equipment and machinery at the North Gate. From the videos that APD themselves released of the incident, it's clear that engagement with the police was limited to keeping officers at bay as construction equipment was targeted. And despite the continued referring of fireworks as quote-unquote mortars or explosives, as the chief himself admitted, no officers were harmed during the direct action. In a later episode, we'll hear more of Chief Schierbaum's explanation of Sunday night's events, as it gives insight into the police's own surveillance capabilities and their ability to respond quickly to direct actions. But until then, back to the events of Monday, March 6th. After the city council meeting, I dressed up in the gayest little outfit that I had with me and went back to the woods for the first time since Sunday night for Purim. Initially, people were very cautious when entering the woods again, but as the night went on, more and more people started to pour into the forest, with some choosing to return to their camp. Later that night, I enjoyed an experimental noise show in the living room, probably to the detriment of people trying to sleep in the area. I went to the Purim in the woods. I got to share my memory of the VeggieTales Esther story starring the Tickle Monsters. I got to bond with a few ex-evangelicals about that, so that was fine. Then there was an experimental noise show in the forest, and really I think it actually is worth talking about because this was the first time people
returned to the forest.
Yeah. This was the first time that people returned to the forest in mass since Sunday. And you started to kind of feel people's energy get reinvigorated. The woods became a place again that people were able to be in and feel like they were able to be in community in the woods again.
And that is in keeping with sort of how this movement has always responded to what we, I guess, could call a loss, right?
23 people getting arrested and charged is a great loss.
Yeah, and the bounce back period is pretty quick. The resiliency is continual and always strengthening. Every time that the repression grows, it does seem like the resiliency grows with it.
People were not scared away from the woods. People still were like, no, this is something I care about. I am still going to be in the woods. I'm still going to defend these woods. And you kind of have there's always this essence of fear kind of underlying whenever you're in the Woolani Forest, because people have been arrested and charged for laying in a hammock that
with another defendant
with another defendant, and so you know that it is fundamentally a risky place to be, but people think the potential cost is worth it. They continue to be here because they know this is a winnable fight, and they know that it is worth it to defend these woods. Early Tuesday morning, a few Stop Cop City banner drops happened throughout the city. 2 people were detained by police during one of these banner drops, but were later released with a traffic citation after being interrogated separately and extensively photographed by law enforcement officials only identified as, quote, Georgia Police and Homeland Security, unquote. Tuesday was the start of a series of nonviolent direct actions that were being launched around downtown and midtown. Tuesday morning, I followed a small group that went to the headquarters of Norfolk Southern, one of the Atlanta Police Foundation's financial contributors and noted enemy of Ohio.
They entered the lobby, and it's a very small group, but I think half of it was...
It was 5 people and another 5 press people.
Yeah, so they enter and they read aloud a letter to Alan Shaw, the CEO of Norfolk Southern, calling for divestment of Norfolk Southern from Cop City, and immediately they are met with a security guard screaming, go,
get out of the lobby, leave,
you're being criminally trespassed, or you're being trespassed, you have to leave. One of the other security guards runs around with a cell phone camera and shoves it in everybody's faces, reaching rather rudely over you to get my face.
Yes,
and
they got very close to me. Entering the Norfolk Southern building.
Please,
And so the whole thing lasts less than 5 minutes, maybe right around 5 minutes. When they finished reading the letter, all they asked was that the letter go to the CEO.
Yep. While people were inside the headquarters, security called NS Police, which is the Norfolk Southern Police, who are legally allowed to arrest people.
But nobody was arrested at that nonviolent direct action. The whole thing was over pretty quickly, and as we were walking out, we saw a force of Norfolk Southern Police swarm kind of the exterior of the campus and keep an eye out on things.
And then we moved over to Woodruff Park, which was the meeting place for these nonviolent direct actions that happened about every day at noon, starting on Tuesday. It's Tuesday, March 7th, around noon. There's about 50 or so people gathered in Woodruff Park who are heading out and marching to go stop by 2 of the Atlanta Police Foundation corporate funders.
We roll up, and I think at that point there were 20-ish protesters. It started off very small. There was no police, no real visible police presence. There were maybe a cruiser or 2 kind of around. And activists started to gather and kind of talk about what their plan is for the day, which was just to march around to 3 different sites. They wanted the AT&T building, the Georgia Pacific building, and GSU.
Georgia State University.
Shut it